the biggest message is we're all unique. We all have, all sorts of different life experiences. And I also do believe that there is a transgenerational epigenetic programming.
Yeah.
So, I think that's been kind of clinically proven, and Mayo Clinic, has really highlighted some of the research studies around the 3 to 7 generation hypothesis that, this goes back, before us. It's beyond us. And that just because, you're going to your doctor and they're just saying, hey, your blood work looks normal and you don't feel right, and you're not getting the right answers, there is hope.
Welcome back to the Capital Integrative Health Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Wong, and I'm excited to bring you a conversation today with Dr. Anil Bajnath, diving into the topics of omics and personalized medicine. Dr. Bajnath is a board-certified family physician and author of The Longevity Equation, the step-by-step blueprint to hack your genes, optimize your health, and master the art of existence. In today's conversation, we'll be exploring what omics are and how Dr. Bajnath uses precision medicine to create personalized treatment plans for his patients. We'll also talk about how he integrates this approach into his medical practice and what you can do to bring this level of care into your wellness plan. So if you're curious about precision medicine and genomics and how this can improve your health, you definitely don't want to miss this episode. Let's jump right in. Hey, Anil, welcome to the CIH podcast. We're so glad that you're here.
Hey, Andy, it's always a pleasure getting to hang out with you. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you so much
Yes,
for having me.
thank you for coming on, and definitely this will be a lot of fun. I know we have talked over the years as colleagues and as friends, and really we know that it is all about having fun when we're talking about discussing health and wellness, because fun makes, kind of makes the merry-go-round of life, a little bit more enjoyable.
It really does. You got to enjoy what you do. And, our conversations over the years for me have always been, encouraging and inspiring on multiple levels, both clinically, spiritually, professionally. And I thank you for those conversations.
Same here, same here. And I think let's segue into enjoyment and fun with our first question, which is a very broad question, but I think this is also very fascinating because I think a lot of times people are wondering, or listeners are wondering, how does Anil, what makes Anil tick? How did you get into the functional medicine space? And I think this is very inspiring for people as well. So kind of just, if you would, tell us about what drew you to get into functional medicine, become a practitioner, and what you enjoy most about what you do when you're kind of having fun on a daily basis.
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, it's a labor of love. I got into the health sciences and the healing arts, as a teenager. I started off working at a Whole Foods market back when it was owned by John Mackey and the hippies, pre-Amazon days, and worked in the vitamin
Yeah,
area. And that
nice.
was my first exposure to some of the nutraceuticals. And at that time, we actually had tons of different doctors from around the world that would come in and tour Whole Foods markets around the US and provide educational seminars and series, almost along the lines of how pharmaceutical reps would, host these events and train you on the products and in the methods and mechanisms of action and so forth. So that was kind of my first, exposure to the world of integrative medicine at, the age of 16. And it basically carried forward and did a senior project in high school around, natural medicine and all the different vitamins, minerals, homeopathics, and herbs. And then from there, actually, my one of my high school wrestling coaches got me introduced to a technique using the microscope you see behind me there, dark field phase contrast microscopy, and flew out and got certified in Chicago with this technique at the age of 19. Bought the microscope, started analyzing everyone's blood. I thought I wanted to be a hematopathologist until I did a, kind of a rotation at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Orlando, Florida, where I was majoring in molecular microbiology and medical laboratory science. And, after working there, I realized I enjoy speaking to people and not just being a lab rat, so to speak. And so I've always been into, the kind of the healing arts and the molecular sciences. And during undergrad, I essentially was sought out different trainings with, different mentors and doctors. I completed a 2-year seminar series with the European biological medicine practice of Paracelsus. So the Paracelsus Network with Dr. Thomas Rao. I also completed training with Peter Diadamo with his course that he was hosting back then, kind of in regards to nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. And so that was really exciting. So, it's always been something that I've been really interested in. My first functional medicine course was like in 2005 with the Apex group and Datis Karazian, who's another blockbuster in the space. So it's really a labor of love, which kind of has directed me towards, the field that I'm in now, with functional medicine, anti-aging, regenerative medicine, and teaching at the university. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Anil, just with that background, you've really gone through the greatest hits of all the different functional gurus and, integrative practitioners. You're really someone that's really gotten into the world of omics. And that's kind of our topic today is kind of how you bring genetic studies and, lab results and precision medicine into your practice, kind of how you think about that. I think for listeners, just to start broadly, for those who may not be as familiar with it, what is omics? If you could just define that and why is that so important for human health?
It's really interesting because when you really start, looking at the translational science process, meaning connecting those molecular dots from genome to pathophenome or from DNA to disease and dysfunction, right? We're able to, build upon this architecture that gives rise to the human construct and our ability to kind of understand and navigate what's going on that molecular level. And, again, being, a molecular microbiologist by training, I always wanted to implement and infuse these different resources into clinical practice. And, from the time that I graduated high school to the time where we're at now, there's been some tremendous advancements with the completion of the Human Genome Project and all sorts of other research in the field of precision medicine. And, so omics broadly refers to looking at those different respected subsciences. For example, genomics, looking at DNA, transcriptomics, looking at RNA, proteomics, looking at the proteins, metabolomics, looking at metabolism, right? Microbiomics, looking at how the microbes externally and internally are affecting us. And also even looking at the envirobiome, which is the external environment and how that influences and shapes our health expression. So it's very interesting. So each one kind of connects that molecular dot. And and somehow I stumbled into the position of being the course director for the Omics of Medicine class at George Washington University, where I teach other fellows undergoing the fellowship and the master's degree this kind of advanced translational science process. And to me, it's just one of those things that's just very fascinating to look at because, we all have our unique book of life, which was kind of genetically inherited 50% co-authored by your biological mother and then 50% by your biological father. And that combination of inheritance patterns coupled with just our life experience gives rise to kind of who we are, what we are, our disease disposition, and our resiliency. So I really think that looking at individuals through that lens, using omics and systems biology is one of the most precise ways of navigating individualized medicine and care. Um, and then also, a big part of that is looking at the epigenome and how that environment influences, gene expression, right? Because we know that, we're receiving all these different signals and inputs from the periphery that's influencing our gene expression. And we have the ability to turn up different favorable genes, and we have the ability to turn down, unfavorable genes based on various signals and inputs that we're feeding our cells, whether it's actual food or environmental pathogens. It's quite fascinating to see that on a precision level.
So, a couple of interesting thoughts there I had when you were talking is that it sounds like precision medicine will be kind of better suited towards someone really deeply understanding their physiology and how they can express or not express various genes in terms of epigenetics, almost like precision begets better prevention. Is that a sort of an accurate statement there?
I would definitely say yes. If you had access to your owner's manual and we were able to kind of figure out, hey, why, when I eat these certain types of foods, I just feel lethargic and sluggish. I might bloat a
Yeah.
little bit. I might experience aches and pains. Or, hey, why is there this kind of prevalency amongst, different generations of this specific disease or dysfunction? And that understanding and leveraging that information for empowerment, I think, is one of our greatest opportunities, but not to overstate it, because again, I really feel as though that, the promise of genetics, and what it was touted to be clinically, 10, 15 years ago, doesn't carry the same magnitude because of that epigenetic factor, that concept of genetic determinism, where if you have this gene, it's a doomsday diagnosis or whatever it is no longer the prevailing kind of consensus, is as we better understand, the difference between genetics, genomics, and epigenetics. And again, the difference, for the audience here, I think would be important to define, whereas genetics is kind of looking at things through the traditional lens of Mendelian genetics and inheritance patterns, looking at those inborn errors of metabolism, your PKUs and cystic fibrosis, and those kind of obscure issues, whereas genomics is referring to the entire book, where we're looking at all the different variations in genes, what's also known as single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, and how that influences our clinical expression, and how we could leverage that information for multiple clinical applications. Additionally, I think that we're getting away from looking at SNPs now over the past couple of years, and we're looking
Okay.
at what's called polygenetic risk scores, where
Mhm.
we're aggregating clusters of genes and how that influences various molecular networks and pathways. And leveraging that information, I think, has a tremendous, you know, potential at for overall health optimization.
So really, as these science advances and some of this gets into clinical practice, it seems like the kind of going back to functional medicine lens, it's a bit more like we can't totally discount the complexity. Like we first tried to use the Human Genome Project to say, oh, we're going to figure out all these, genes and just decode everything just from that. But it wasn't that simple. So then we went to SNPs, and now we're going to the polygenetic risk factors, right? So it's almost like the more we delve into it, the more that it's all connected still.
Exactly. And then one of the things that I love to use in clinical practice is actually transcriptomics. So, again, going back to the central dogma of biology, which is DNA into RNA and RNA into protein, right? I actually, use transcriptomic data in my clinical practice regularly, especially dealing with chronic complex illness, to kind of unpack kind of the core factors that could be influencing somebody's gene expression. We're not necessarily looking at what DNA you have using transcriptomics, but we're more so looking at the behavior of very specific gene patterns, right? So, and it's very interesting to look at. And my mentor, Dr. Andrew Heyman, likes to give the analogy: if we're looking at the transcriptome, we're essentially looking at these various genes, right? If we were to look at if genes as maybe the instruments of your own personal symphony orchestra, we're measuring various sections of that orchestra, the strings and the brass and so forth. And maybe we're going to the flute and we're assessing, is the flute appropriately tuned appropriately, or the piano, is that piano like essentially tuned appropriately, and what's the harmony coming off of that piano? Is it up regulated, is it down regulated in sound and structure? And that's kind of I think a really important opportunity clinically, is looking at that transcriptome and how to apply it clinically.
And let's talk about, that's great. Let's talk about how we apply that clinically. So a patient walks into your clinic, maybe they have chronic fatigue, maybe they have mold exposure or whatnot. How are you bringing, omics and personalized preventative healthcare modalities, genomic medicine, all the different advanced biomarkers that you talk about into your practice?
Well, so generally, it's very interesting. So it depends on who's walking through the door and what their goals are, what their symptoms are. Generally
Yeah.
speaking, with the Institute for Human Optimization, I'm dealing with a subset of the population that's maybe a little bit more aware of some of the biohacking space and health optimization world. But I
Mhm.
also work with Dr. Andrew Heyman and his practice as well. A mentor of mine, and also we work together and teach together at George Washington
Yeah.
University, where we're advancing the science, the translational science of chronic inflammatory response syndrome.
Mhm.
Now, with SIRS medicine, which you have kind of inferred with the mold exposure, there's kind of this algorithm and protocol for which you navigate, these different cases. But essentially, we look to see if individuals of the population have a very specific HLA haplotype, and based on that genetic predisposition of your HLAs, and that could determine whether or not you're part of that kind of 25% of the population that carries with it that haplotype that kind of predisposes them towards these environmentally acquired sensitivities and potential illnesses. And then once we kind of identify that, and there's a series of other additional tests that we use, like a VCS test, and which is a visual contrast sensitivity test to screen for neuroinflammation. We then look to the system clusters, and if you have 8 out of 13 symptoms, there's a high association that 98% certainty that this could be SIRS, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And then we test the environment with envirobiomics. We look at the proteomics in regards to the various biomarkers like TGF beta 1, MMP9, C3a, C4a, VEGF, and a whole host of others, low MSH, low, a few others, and that's a proteomic signature. And then we also use the transcriptomics to look at the molecular signature of kind of what's going on underneath the hood. So we kind of connect those molecular dots in that sense, to further identify what's going on. And you brought up chronic fatigue. Myalgic encephalitis is a very common kind of issue. And one of the things that we see on a transcriptomic level with these individuals, and it's not always SIRS. It could also be associated with, histamine dysregulation and things of that nature, but is something called molecular hypometabolism. And that
Hmm.
molecular hypometabolism is essentially referring to how the mitochondria are triaging energy. Right. And it ties back into what's known in the literature as cell danger response. And we've all heard of cell danger. Most of us have heard of cell danger response, in regards to cells kind of sense danger, and they respond by shifting and reallocating its resources and energy production towards like a defensive posturing due to that threat, that environmental threat. So we see, these signs of molecular hypometabolism on a mitochondrial level, and we see other signs of, kind of how the body kind of reallocates its energy and triaging of energy and resources due to those environmental signals and threats.
This is a transcriptomics test, or for the molecular signals for hypometabolism, or
Yes.
what labs are these? Are these blood tests, or what kind of labs?
It's a blood test. It's called Progene DX,
Okay,
from
okay.
they're a lab out of Massachusetts, and with Jimmy Ryan, Dr. Shoemaker, and Andrew Heyman are kind of, the major researchers and clinicians
So
behind.
these would be people with chronic fatigue or mold or different chronic illnesses. You wouldn't necessarily order a transcriptomics, I should say, on a healthy patient walking in looking to better their CrossFit game or something, right? Or would
Not
you?
on that type of person.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
actually, it's interesting because when you look at, especially aging as
Yeah.
a biological process,
Yeah.
I'm sure you're very familiar with the cell biology publication in 2013 with Lopez et al. On, the hallmarks of aging. And
Yeah.
you might have seen that it's been kind of updated
Yeah.
a few months ago in January of
Yeah.
2023, and essentially adding on three new hallmarks of aging, which include, the dysregulated macroautophagy, chronic inflammation, and dysbiosis or microbiome imbalance issues. And that kind of ties into this big issue that we see with biological aging as a whole, right? Is that we have this chronic inflammation process that's taking place. Now, everybody's inflammaging is different, right? And what's perpetuating that. And I think, the transcriptomics could be a benefit to certain individuals. I reserve that test for kind of like the mystery illnesses with all sorts of like kind of uncertainties of what's going on that molecular level, and not necessarily my jujitsu buddies that are coming in for, other health optimization issues, peptides, hormones, and regenerative modalities. So again, I
Mhm.
try to be mindful with what I pull the trigger on with individuals, but I try to get at least everybody to get genotype to my practice. Additionally, I liked, the biological age testing as well, to kind of, really put into perspective from an aging, kind of baseline how we're aging. That pace of aging is really important.
Mhm.
I
Are
know
you
there's
using the DNA methylation, true age, and different things, or what are you using
Yeah,
there?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
like true age.
Yeah.
I actually for my birthday a year ago, I went and toured the facility and everything else before I went and enjoyed the Bourbon Trail out in Kentucky. Um,
That's nice.
they have a wonderful lab, and honestly, their bioinformatics is top notch. I know there's some criticisms right now in the space whether or not, these clock genes are accurate representations of, of aging. Some would say it's kind of misleading to the consumer to say, "Hey, we're going to reverse your biological age." But I think, it's a great opportunity if we have the resources to kind of peek under the hood to see, what that epigenetic expression's looking like. What is our aging process looking like,
Yeah.
and the pace of aging, and we could do things to kind of identify that. And if you've run that panel, it's quite wonderful. It's, you got your intrinsic and extrinsic age. Additionally, you have your Dudane pace of aging, which is, a major study, as well, that really identifies that. Now they've added on telomeres, right, and
Yeah.
stem cell activity.
I'll
So
have to recheck it. I did check mine a couple years ago, but I haven't done the updated test. So I'm really excited about the new additions they have to that test.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I really like that, and that's kind of where I like to start. From a health optimization standpoint, what's your biological age baseline? And do we have the ability to augment, that longevity trajectory? Which kind of ties into my book that I'm finishing up the final edits in, the longevity equation. So within the longevity equation, we kind of lay out all these different factors. We unpack the hallmarks of aging. And then also, I'm willing to share with your audience here now, I've trademarked this concept of the biological 401k. And the biological 401k is essentially our internal biological health savings account, right? And essentially, we have the savings account, and we're making meaningful deposits and withdrawals in different forms of bioenergetic currency to this account. And meaningful bioenergetic epigenetic currency would include sleep, nutrition, diet, exercise, meaning and purpose, relationships, optimize environment, stress reduction, decreasing that allostatic load, all the fun things that we talk about in the field of integrative and functional medicine. But it also, looks at those are, the deposits and withdrawals. So we know that, hey, man, I've got a newborn, my sleep's gone to crap. My aura ring is yelling at me, hey, I
Yeah,
used to
yeah.
be optimal. Now it's like good, warning signs,
They don't have that baby curve. They don't curve it up for the baby, I guess. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
there's no factor to shift that,
Yeah.
and adjust for that variable. But essentially, it's just one of those things where we're looking at these different kind of biological deposits and withdrawals from our biological 401k. And ultimately, what we have is this savings account that is essentially going to, the ROI on this savings account is going to be essentially cultivating resiliency and increasing your health span over your lifespan and compressing that time of disease and dysfunction, and hopefully growing old into our welderly, as Dr. Eric Topol
Oh, I
mentioned.
like that. I love that.
Yeah.
Welterly. Well, just to request on a sneak peek, and I would be in first in line for your book. So hopefully I can get mine today for your book. It sounds amazing, Anil. I'm just curious about physiologically how those 401k deposits happen. Is it kind of healthier DNA methylation? Is it kind of loss of zombie cells? What's kind of going on under the hood? I guess that's something you're looking at your book. And I had to bring in zombie cells. I knew I wanted to talk about that today.
Oh, I
So
love it.
thanks
I
for bringing
love
that
it.
up.
Ye-
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think looking under the hood, there's so many different ways to assess your resiliency, because at the big picture with this is looking at, loss of resiliency and adaptive capacity being kind of the benchmark of growing old. Some people are more focused on their aesthetics, or their performance and so forth. But ultimately, once we lose those adaptive capacities, right, that's truly the benchmark of disease and dysfunction, right?
Yeah.
Because if you were to ask, well, what is health? Is health merely the absence of disease? I don't think so. I think health is actually a homeodynamic process that's constantly in flux, right? It's not static, it's dynamic. And we're going to be putting in various signals and inputs that influences various allostatic loads, that's going to basically translate into how our body kind of balances out. But health isn't merely an absence of disease. It's the adaptive capacity to have resiliency, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And there's articles and publications around resiliency and aging that we could unpack a little bit further. But to answer more specifically, yes, nutrition in regards to nutrients, as Kara Fitzgerald has mentioned in her book,
Yeah.
looking at these different foods as providing information, communicating with. So, week 4 of the class that I teach, and I have some wonderful faculty, oh my gosh, that I'm so blessed to be a part of at George Washington University. Week 4 is the Nutrigenetic lecture that we have. And we mentioned that, hey, Food is information communicating with your DNA and enhancing gene or influencing gene expression. So that's one of our greatest opportunities with the foods that we're eating to change the way our cells are functioning. These phytonutrients bind to G protein coupled receptors, influence secondary messengers within the cell, cyclic AMP and IP3 and all these other kind of pathways, and turn on the molecular signals to enhance those favorable gene expressions. So yes, epinutrients, diet's a big part of it, sleep's a big part of it, joy and happiness, heart rate variability, all of those different factors are, within our locus of potential control to enhance our gene expression. But additionally, just to tie back into what you mentioned, a favorite topic of mine is the zombie cells, also known as cellular senescence in the literature. And one of the, key 12 hallmarks of aging, it kind of is like this gatekeeper that gets into the terminal hallmarks, and for the audience, essentially, senescent cells or zombie cells are refers to cells that kind of bioaccumulate damage with time, right? They also might hit what is known as a Hayflick limit, which was originally discovered at, with Dr. Hayflick and Moorhead in 19, I think 51 or 61, with their research with fibroblasts. And essentially, what they found was that these fibroblastic cells underwent X amount of mitotic divisions or their ability to divide, and they hit, the number around 50. What they found is, oh man, after 50 or so cellular divisions, the cell stopped dividing. Okay. And it lost a lot of function, right? It wasn't dead, it wasn't alive, and it was actually metabolically active. And fast forward to what our understanding of cellular senescence now, right? We know that it's basically arrested in the G1 interphase of the cell cycle, rendering it metabolically active and producing what's called these SAS factors, the senescent associated secretory phenotype. And these SAS proteins actually accelerate the biological aging process. It's almost like poisoning the well. And there's some research that
Yeah.
shows that one cell out of 5 to 15,000 could accelerate the additional formation of senescent cells in our system. But what happens when these senescent cells outpace the immunological clearance? This is where we start seeing that accumulation of those cells being associated with age-related changes in the brain. It's now being associated with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and there's clinical studies going on with that. There's been some really great human clinical trials in regards to kidney fibrosis and idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis,
Yeah.
interventions to remove those cells using
Wow.
various drug therapies and modalities such as dasatinib, quercetin, right? And there's a whole host of different studies that's going on right now at Mayo Clinic with Dr. Kirkland and his lab that's looking at, these interventions to remove senescent cells and to see how that influences disease progression. But in my opinion, removing these zombie cells is great, but it's not addressing the latter hallmarks, right? Which is altered cellular communication, right? And stem cell exhaustion. And I believe the another terminal hallmark is, the dysbiosis and chronic inflammation. So, if you're looking at it from, the aging perspective and the mechanisms behind it, just because you remove these senescent cells does not mean you're going to rejuvenate the stem cells, right? And, it's stem cell rejuvenation, as you may have seen in the literature, in regards to Yamanaka factors and, those different genes that regulate this, stem cell rejuvenation is another key opportunity at kind of enhancing the biological age reversal. So that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, then we'll have to have you back and talk more about your book when it comes out. I'm so excited for that. Like I said, first in line for that book if you have a waiting line for that. I think the biggest thing is that, what I learned from Kara when she was on, number one, the most important thing is that her mother made her a rosemary salt shaker. That's one of those like epigenetic hacks that she like sprinkles on her food. But I think, aging is one of those things that if we can age healthily, then we really are mitigating or even preventing potentially a lot of disease down the road, because we're really affecting the whole system, the whole biology there. So I think this is a really, really important topic. And I'm kind of wanted to tie it back into omics again. So I was wondering if you use in your practice SNP testing. You said it's kind of more getting into other things like polygenetic risk factors and transcriptomics, et cetera. But are you still using SNPs at all? And if so, how relevant is that?
Of course, I
Yeah.
think it's important to still keep SNPs on hand,
Yeah.
and be able to go back to that kind of blueprint to navigate, why is this person's GGT levels, gamma glutamyl transferase, so high? Why do they do so well on glutathione? Well, maybe they have those, polymorphisms in glutathione recycling. What's their cytochrome P450s looking at? And I also think one of our greatest clinical applications is looking at this through the lens of pharmacogenomics. Pharmacogenomics is critical, right, for the future of
Yeah.
personalized medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
dialing in who's going to respond more favorably to what interventions, because as we know, there is an ethnic kind of association here where, certain people respond to certain interventions differently.
Okay.
Right. And this is, we could look at what I think is a great study that's coming out now is the MESA study, the multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis, which is a modern day Framingham, study.
Yeah.
And, as this study kind of starts unpacking all these different ethnic diversities, we're now finding that certain races respond to certain interventions differently and more favorably than others. And the same ASCVD risk score that we use for everybody is not going to be the same tool to further risk stratify individuals for these cardiometabolic and heart disease issues. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is we should go towards personalized medicine and kind of continue to move away from cookie cutter medicine, because cookie cutter doesn't really give you the results that you want, it sounds like.
It's interesting. I want to say that one size does not fit all, most definitely, because we're totally different. I'm bald, brown, and bearded, and you're Asian, and I'm Southeast Asian, and we have just so much diversity here, and there's so many different factors that influence that. And I think where we need to evolve to within the literature is looking at how we could start doing N of one clinical trials where every single individual is at the center of their own unique clinical trial, where we try to look at things, most of the clinical models of study right now has been kind of geared towards this biopharmaceutical model, post Framingham report for the standardization of medicine. And essentially, what we're doing is we're taking this large clinical, trial of thousands of people, and we're saying, "Hey, take this drug, or you get placebo. We're going to
Yeah,
randomize
yeah,
it, right?" And then all of a sudden, we get data, and then that data, as we saw during COVID research, could be very shifty and easily manipulated to enhance or discredit whatever the hell you want to look at, right? I think, it's important to have those large clinical studies, but the research and the science of the masses needs to be further stratified to the individual, right? Because my genetic blueprint's going to be totally different for and receptive to a drug intervention versus somebody else's based on my, cytochrome
yeah.
P50s or other molecular targets comparatively.
Yeah, that's great answer. And I do have a funny thought about that. Although we look different, we're brothers from another mother, right? That's kind of the thing. I think I can probably, it's likely that we both, like a lot of the same things, but I guess phenotypically, but I'm curious about, this is a public health question really, but let's say, we have, millions of people in the United States, billions of people around the world. Who's going to access this type of care? How do you stratify, like, where to start with the fundamental lifestyle factors? Who needs omics testing? Who needs functional medicine testing? Where do you kind of, where would you see, kind of the whole access point for some of this type of more advanced personalized medicine?
Well, it's interesting. That's a great question. And from a public health initiative, how do we increase access to care? And that was one of the main topics that Mayo Clinic recently just had their individualized medicine conference back in November of last year, and they have it every year. And I mean, they're really pushing this narrative forward with precision medicine and looking at how to overcome these different obstacles. And one of the biggest factors here is how do you overcome, number one, increase access, but also overcome some of the hesitancy that the general public would have if there's some sort of commercialization of genetic testing. Do we have to be
Mm-hmm.
fearful of genetic discrimination, even though there's
Mm-hmm.
the GINA Act, the Genetic Information
Mm-hmm.
Non-Discrimination Act,
Yeah.
or do we have to be concerned about how this is going to influence care for the individual as a
Mm.
whole, right? So there's a lot of different factors there that I think from a public health initiative we're grappling with. But one of the things that I think is more kind of creeping up into the realm of insurance-based models in our kind of healthcare system here in the US is that they're actually allowing in certain populations coverage for genomic testing for pharmacogenomic applications, right? So we're seeing that kind of infused into different healthcare models, more
Yeah.
on the West Coast than the East Coast comparatively.
Okay.
We're also seeing reimbursement for pharmacogenomic testing in various subsets of the population. And we're seeing that infusion within the EMR system, within the centralized database in the healthcare system. So I'm really excited to see a gradual adaptation to, some of these principles in various clinical settings to various capacities. So it's coming, right?
Yeah.
Now, how do you kind of determine who needs what based on what? I mean, it's really individualized. I like to deal with like the biohackers and the people that are really curious about understanding their book of life and their what's going on in their health conundrum, and putting those pieces together and connecting those molecular dots. And from a functional medicine perspective, we're always looking at the root cause of what could be leading to this disease and function.
Absolutely.
Looking at ATMs are antecedents, triggers, and mediators.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends on the situation. Is it simply,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you need to cut out the gluten because of whatever issues you're having? Or is it, hey, your thyroid is there's undiagnosed Hashimoto's, and that's tied into the gluten? Is it an endocrine dysregulation? And another big thing is looking at environmental component. The
Mm.
environmental component so critical. I'm sure you've done so much testing with these different environmental toxicants, and we see the same damn
Yeah.
culprits every freaking time.
Yeah.
Plastics, pesticides, and other aflatoxins and heavy metals,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's a real big thing, that you
Yeah.
need to address and remove that ongoing exposure. Do an environmental audit and clean up the environment, and do other interventions to help promote biotransformation and elimination.
Yeah. A lot of my patients, a lot of our patients ask, like, well, why are my heavy metals so high? Or why are my plastic levels so high? Is it because you're a human on the earth? The
Yeah.
earth is polluted and we got to find a way to clean that up. But I think this is a very common finding, really.
Andy, why clean it up when we could invent the bubble, my friend? We need to build a bubble, right?
Let's do that. We can do that. As long
I'm
as there's
kidding.
tacos there, we got to have a taco stand there. That's
Definitely need
important.
tacos, without a doubt. I love some buffalo cauliflower tacos or
Amazing. So I guess my other question for that, Anil, is so someone's kind of coming into your clinic. I'd love to give the listeners, if you don't mind, like a taste of kind of how you practice medicine and how you would use genomics in a case, if you have like a brief little case vignette of someone that you felt was, helped with this type of precision medicine. I think it would really illustrate, how we might use this in practice.
Sure. I'm trying to think of a great case. There's so many,
Too many to under, yeah, too many to
it's like, where
actually
do we begin? I
where you
mean, there's
begin, right,
obviously
right.
the traditional SIRS case where it's like, all
Yeah,
right, you're genetically predisposed, transcriptomically demonstrating activity of, upregulation in the genes associated with SIRS, and then you have the envirobiomics connection and the proteomic connection. That's kind of a slam dunk in regards to that chronic inflammatory response syndrome. But for the other 75% of the population, how could they leverage this information for
yeah.
further, enhancement? I think a couple of opportunities here. I think number one, one of the things that I see mostly is looking at diet, right? How do we leverage this information for diet? What's the appropriate macronutrients that I should be using? Number one, based on genetics. Number two, based on your actual metabolism and VO2 max. That's going to
Hmm.
shift your ratios on protein, fat, carb, and and set up some of the nutrigenetic kind of associations. And I could tell you stories about people having I have a young lady who is a nurse practitioner who has been suffering with all sorts of issues, neuropsychiatric, cognitive issues, skin issues her entire life. And sure enough, when you start peeling back some of the genetics, we're finding that she has some defects in her collagen synthesis that's leading to some truncated proteins and dysregulated keratin production, leading to these eczematous kind of skin formations and things of that nature. And then it's also tied into some of the truncated proteins on the adaptive side of the immune response, and that's leading to her, why am I always sick question.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, this is
Yeah.
why we're lacking this part of the sophisticated part of the immune system to achieve a normal adaptive kind of regulatory kind of process to deal with these different threats, whatever it is. And then what do you do with this information in regards to, well, if you start seeing that from the genetic level and then the proteomic level, that there is a clinical manifestation of that, well, you treat that issue, whether that's looking at a chronic neutropenia with a low CD57 count and looking into transfer factors, or if it's looking at elevations in GGT with defects associated with glutathione recycling. It's macrocytosis and MTHFR and homocysteine. We all know that one. So there's looking at some of the detox pathways as we start unpacking at hormonal metabolites. There's so many different clinical applications that you could use to kind of refine and enhance the clinical process. I hope that answered your question.
It does. It does. I think it just kind of teaches us that there's just so many rich and varied applications of this kind of science, and really the whole point of medicine, in my opinion, is really just to better our lives, so that we can be of service for others and for hopefully the world. I think that everyone wants to live their best life, and this is a real way to a pathway forward to help people as system and kind of becoming the CEO of their own health with more data, right, instead of blindfold on. So I like that so much. And I think we often close with, and I thank you, Anil, for coming on today. We definitely have to do many more podcasts to talk about some of the rabbit holes that we need to kind of dive into more. Definitely want to talk more about various kind of biohacking or resilience topics. Would be amazing. Just in general, in terms of like take home points, what is like the one thing or maybe one or two things you wish kind of everyone knew about kind of omics and the genetics, genomics, omics, etc. space that would benefit them?
I think that the biggest message is we're all unique. We all have, all sorts of different life experiences. And I also do believe that there is a transgenerational epigenetic programming.
Yeah.
So, I think that's been kind of clinically proven, and Mayo Clinic, has really highlighted some of the research studies around the 3 to 7 generation hypothesis that, this goes back, before us. It's beyond us. And that just because, you're going to your doctor and they're just saying, hey, your blood work looks normal and you don't feel right, and you're not getting the right answers, there is hope. Right. And to me, again, being a molecular biologist, I like to start off with deconstructing things. And some people don't like that. Some people are more like really bioenergetic, and they want to feel things a little bit more, and do less sciency things and more like bioenergetic things. And I totally respect that. Everybody's different. My mind is just programmed towards that, as again a molecular biologist, to connect those molecular dots. And I think leveraging this information for empowerment is going to be critical. As Dr. Jeffrey Bland says, this information should not be, for, should not be used to kind of strike fear into people, but to be used for better understanding and empowerment. So that's kind of like the big take home message.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Do you have any, thank you. Do you have any resources for anyone who might want to learn more about omics? And certainly we want to also have our listeners, have some resources to where to learn more, where to go to learn more about you and work with you, etc.
Yeah, so I have my private practice with the Institute for Human Optimization, ifho.org. And I have information there as well. And I'm going to be releasing more content, especially with the book. Once it's kind of delivered, I'm going to be starting the longevity equation podcast, and I'm building out this biological 401k kind of an immersive program as we speak. So I'm working on a lot of projects here, so
It's
that we
awesome.
could kind of like educate ourselves for empowerment. That's the
Yeah.
goal. Becoming the
Yeah.
CEO of your own health is actually the tagline of the
Nice.
biological 401k. So I love that you said that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so essentially, that's what we're going to do. If they want to learn more about omics, they could either, the NIH has a lot of great resources, the National Institutes of Health. Additionally, they could take the class at George Washington University that kind of is a teaser of what we're doing here in clinical practice. So, there's so many different ways to do that. But, I encourage anybody that wants to kind of go through the process to schedule a discovery call on my website, ifho.org. And, because I'm kind of, selective with who I work with in regards to certain things. I just want to make sure it's a good fit for both of us, and I could best serve people to my fullest capacity.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then finally, just another question about kind of access and just kind of for the listener. Part of our mission at CIH, as you know, is making integrative healthcare more accessible and focusing on the small steps that we can take to improve our health. So we'd love to hear from you, Anil. What is one thing under $20 that you feel has transformed your health? Before you answer, I will say that some of our previous guests during this time of inflation have said, $20 is too cheap. We need it to be $100. So I'm kind of giving people a little bit of a choice there, but let's try to start with under $20 if we can, and we can go from there.
You know, I got to be honest, and I tell this to all my friends, family, and patients. I have not taken an antibiotic in, I don't know, over 20 something years, maybe 30
Amazing.
years since I was a
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know how or why I've been so lucky and blessed. Maybe it's because I got into supplementation and everything else, at a young age, and I've always been supplementing. Um, but I have been sleeping next to my bed on the nightstand with colloidal silver since a teenager. And I know there's mixed opinions about colloidal silver, this, that, and the other, but I'll tell you what, anytime I notice a sniffle, a tickle, or a scratch, a itch,
Yeah, yeah.
I just start it, and for me, it's worked very nicely. So I usually use that as like a kind of superficial topical kind of antimicrobial agent, whatever it might be. And then I move into other immune modulating supplements, depending on the presentation to address whatever issue to get ahead of it.
You're talking
Because
about a spray or liquid, something like that, in
yeah,
the
the
mouth?
sublingual, the throat spray, the
Sublingual.
nasal
Yep.
spray,
Okay.
Argentin, is a
Argentin,
great
yeah.
one.
Okay.
But so is, the consumer version of it that's available at Whole Foods, which is Sovereign Silver.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
For
Mhm.
me, that's what's, helped me over the years, greater than 23 years now since I've been taking it. And I love it, and I have not really been ill because I that's next to the nightstand. And even if I feel a little worn down and I feel as though, oh no, just too much and too much exposure, I just do a little dose. There's a maintenance dose that you theoretically could take on the regular, and then there's acute dosing that you could do if battling an illness. And I don't do the maintenance. I just take it every now and then if I need to load up, I load up,
Right.
and
And then without taking antibiotics, right, that's actually protecting Anil's microbiome for the last 20 years by not having to take antibiotics. That's nice.
that has always been at the forefront of the rationalization, is that I'm trying to preserve my amazing bowel health. I'm telling you.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the thing we can kind of touch on here at the end is that, it's about genomics and epigenetics, but of course the microbiome is a big
Huge.
part, a huge part of our kind of even, genetic material and how that gets expressed.
Oh yeah, and as part of my testing is looking at everybody's microbiome,
Yeah,
because that's,
yeah,
that's where, Hippocrates said that all disease begins in the gut. And
yeah,
I think
yeah.
even Sir William Osler, one of the four horsemen of Johns Hopkins, echoed that as well with his quotes. And essentially, I really think that it's one of our greatest opportunities, and with the recent, kind of evolution of the Human Microbiome Project, it's one of our greatest potentials of harnessing the power of this. And so I guard my microbiome at all costs. Obviously the gambles that I take are sketchy taco spots when traveling, but for
With
the
some
most
bourbon, with
part,
some bourbon. Yeah.
with the bourbon. Yeah, I'm actually, I don't have bourbon all the time, but I believe that bourbon is one of America's first medicines, especially as exhibited during the time of Prohibition. I have a
Nice.
pretty expansive bourbon collection.
Okay, okay,
It's
nice.
if you saw it, you would think I would have a problem. I have like an apothecary at my house here of kind of medical knickknacks, and I have this prescription for medicinal bourbon
Okay,
from the time of Prohibition,
that's
and
interesting. Yeah,
all sorts of stuff.
that's
But
funny. That's awesome.
yeah,
Well,
so
thank you so much, Anil, for coming on today. Love to have you back to chat more about biohacking, resilience. There's so many topics we could talk about. We could also talk about tacos more. I think that's always a good topic. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I think this is so informative and very hopeful for people. I think just, giving people hope and that, we can take charge of our own, quote unquote genetic destiny or, healthy aging and really trying to live our best lives to be of service to everyone in the world here.
I love it. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and being a friend and mentor to me over the years. It means a lot. And it's truly an honor and pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Thank
You know,
you. You
yeah,
too.
much
Thank
love.
you.
Yeah,
You
thank you.
too. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps our podcast to reach more listeners. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes and conversations. And thank you so much again for being with us.